Love or loathe what's happened in 12 years of Mayor Michael Hancock? One thing the mayor says is indisputably true. As Denver emerges as a global city, it faces the challenges of America's other large urban areas: homelessness, unaffordable housing, public safety issues. In the first round of voting, Denverites pared the crowded field for mayor down to two centrists, both with deep experience. For Kelly Brough at City Hall and the Chamber of Commerce. For Mike Johnston in education, the state legislature, and nonprofit leadership. Tonight, the last of our 3 debates. This is 9 News Presents The Race for Mayor.
Good evening. I'm Kyle Clark, alongside my 9 News colleagues Anusha Roy and Marshall Zelinger.
The field of 17 candidates for Denver mayor is down to 2 for the June 6th runoff: Kelly Brough and Mike Johnston. Tonight's questions were prepared by 9 News and have not been shared with anyone else in advance.
Candidates will have 1 minute to answer questions with rebuttals and further discussion at our discretion. You'll also have an opportunity to ask each other at least 1 question tonight.
You have appeared together a great number of times over the course of this campaign, a number of different formats. We want to remind both you and the folks at home, this is intended to be a debate, a discussion between the two of you on areas where you respectfully disagree. And our goal is for voters to hear clear differences tonight so they can make an informed choice. Let's begin with how to handle the surge of migrants coming to Denver from the southern border right now. We're going to start with some short answer questions on key issues to let folks know where you stand, and then we'll go into an in-depth discussion. Denver is effectively a sanctuary city. City employees are blocked from assisting immigration agents. Would you seek to keep that policy in place, Ms. Brough?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes, I would.
Should other cities and counties in Colorado be assisting Denver by sheltering or providing for some of the migrants who want to stay here? We should note that is currently not happening. Mr. Johnston?
Yes, absolutely they should.
Ms. Brough?
Yes.
Mayor Hancock is currently limiting shelter access to those migrants who have what's called an A number. And essentially just means they've been in contact with immigration. The U.S. knows they're here. They know that they're in the process. The federal government is requiring that status in order to reimburse some of Denver's expenses. Should Denver's shelters be open to all migrants or only those who are already being processed by immigration? Ms. Brough?
Do we get to start to talk about it pretty soon?
You absolutely will, yes.
Yes, but I want to talk more about how we might do that.
Open to all, but we want to discuss it. We can absolutely do that. Mr. Johnson?
I think they should be open to all migrants. We want to remain a welcoming city. We can figure out other ways to pay for those costs that the city can't bear right now, but we shouldn't be putting someone out on the street that has no place to go.
One final short answer, and then we'll go in depth on this. The Hancock administration is currently limiting shelter stays to 2 weeks' time. Would you change that policy, Mr. Johnston?
I would in the case of emergencies, but I think there are better ways for us to help people get to where they're trying to go more quickly. I'm happy to talk more about that from the migrants I've spoken with about their stay here.
Ms. Brough, your thoughts?
I don't understand the basis for the 2-week policy, so I'd look into it more.
The mayor is saying now that caring for migrants has put the city's finances in a really difficult situation, that cuts to city services are a possibility. Here's a chance to talk about this more in depth. Is it acceptable to cut services for citizens in order to provide for migrants? And what would you change about how we're handling the situation? Mr. Johnston?
I think there are a couple things I would change about how we're handling it. One is right now I would start with communicating with El Paso, which is where almost all these migrants are coming from. I talked to the migrants that were here. They're coming there being put on a bus to Denver with no plan to actually go to Denver. Many of them want to go to Chicago or want to go to LA or want to go to Detroit. We could help earlier by partnering with that city to say, let's determine upstream where folks are trying to go and help them get there more quickly. I think that's one. The second is what we know when we sit and talk to these folks is what they deeply want is the ability to work. They're here to try to work. We also know that employers want the same thing. They want people to be able to put to work. The challenge is just we have a federal government who refuse to let people who want to work go to work for employers who want them to work for them. And so what I would do is also reach out to President Biden and Secretary Mayorkas and say they should immediately put in place TPS, temporary protective status, for folks who are here seeking asylum, so we can actually have them get to work while they're here. Then the city doesn't have to be supporting their costs. They'd love to support themselves. They just need the chance to work to be able to do that.
And to clarify, is cutting services for citizens, as Mayor Hancock has suggested as a possibility, is that acceptable in order to provide services for migrants?
I'd like to avoid doing that, and I think there is a way to avoid doing that.
All right, same question to you, Ms. Brough.
Yeah, I don't think what we're doing today is sustainable at all. I volunteered at Rudy Park Rec Center where there were probably 350 migrants, and you got a really good sense of why they're here. They seriously are seeking asylum. And we know our federal government takes months and months to make that decision. It's not sustainable to tell someone You can come into the nation. We'll sort out if you get asylum, but you can't work. It's not going to work for us, and it doesn't work for them. I think our highest priority has to be figuring out how we allow people to work while they wait for the status to go through. That would be my highest priority, and no, I don't think we can afford to continue down the road. I think, Kyle, we've spent $20 million already to address this issue. It's not sustainable at all, so I would not use additional resources taken away from our residents. Instead, I'd focus on them being able to work.
With a federal reimbursement rate of somewhere around 5% for what the city has spent so far, both of you point to this work issue where folks come in, they apply for asylum, they're known to the system, and they're told to wait months before they can again ask for permission to work. It's a federal issue. Other than just asking the federal government for help, what could the mayor of Denver practically do about that? Ms. Brough.
I've already started talking with attorneys on different strategies we might be able to employ to allow people to work while they're waiting for that status. I think there may be some ways we could get this done.
You want to hint at any of them?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, so I think this is almost like an employment agency where you W-4 someone. So they're more like a contract worker. You don't need a social security number, and they can go to work. It's above board, and I think the city could even play a role in facilitating people being able to work.
What do you do, Mr. Johnston, other than just calling the feds and asking them to change federal policy?
Yeah, I think part of it is you do better coordination and partnership with cities around the state and around the region to be able to share the burden so Denver's not carrying all of it. But yes, I came out with a proposal on this early on. We have a whole set of about 14,000 other current employees in Denver who are DACA recipients, who have been migrants, who got access to work papers, who are at risk of losing that work papers. And so we'll have 14,000 more currently employed Coloradans who would be at risk of losing the jobs where employers want them to stay on the job. And I've come out to say you can solve that by being able to create a public-private partnership where you have a staffing agency. Those people can work for the staffing agency. If you are a restaurant and you need 3 servers, you'd come to the staffing agency. We could deploy you 3 servers. You pay the staffing agency, and the staffing agency pays the employees. There is a way to make sure we push the federal government, who's clearly not going to take action swiftly enough on this, to say, if you won't solve this problem, we'll take on solving it right here in Denver.
And then lastly on this issue, what specifically should other municipalities and the state be doing to help that they're not doing now? Ms. Brough.
Well, I think we could partner on putting pressure on the federal government, and not just other municipalities in our state, but frankly in the nation. To both get the payments we need today and expedite those, but also to address this issue in a thoughtful way. And then, of course, helping us just house and manage the challenge before us as partners. The state has stepped in with some funding to help Denver. I would continue to explore with Governor Polis how they could help us more.
And certainly Mayor Hancock has started that process with the mayors of New York City and Houston asking for a face-to-face with the president. Mr. Johnston, lastly on this, what should municipalities and the state be doing that they're not doing now to help with the migrant crisis?
Yeah, there's a lot you can do when you collaborate and when you plan. You know, we faced this challenge before, even after Hurricane Katrina, when Denver took thousands of refugees who came from New Orleans. Same with refugees who came from Afghanistan. When you know what the numbers are that are coming and you know your capacity, you can partner with an Aurora or a Fort Collins or a Pueblo or Colorado Springs and say, can you take 30? Can you take 50? What's your capacity? What do we think our capacity is? And when we're at it, how do we reach out to neighbors to help? I think there are a lot of other municipalities and other states that would want to be a part of the solution if we reach out proactively.
Denver's asked and they've been told no.
Yeah, I think inside the state of Colorado, I have a real belief that there are mayors around the region that would help us. I have confidence. You call Anna Stout in Grand Junction and you call John Southers down in Colorado Springs and others, they'll want to do their part. I was at a faith luncheon this week where people from all sorts of political walks of life shared a commitment to say we should be able to welcome people that show up here with nothing but a dream. And I think this state will continue to back that.
We're going to move now to a discussion about your leadership and your judgment.
The Hancock administration is thrilled that you are the finalists for mayor because they view you as largely a continuation of Hancock policies. Some voters may be less than thrilled with that. So for voters looking for a significant change, a shift in Denver's directions and priorities from the Hancock era, why are you the candidate for that change? Ms. Brough.
Yeah, I think a big part of my running is because I'd like to see a different change as well. So let me highlight some of the areas. For me, I think today government isn't as predictable, accountable, delivering results. And in almost every area of our lives that we're depending on government, whether it's the permitting process and timeframes, or it's picking up our trash or plowing our roads, or taking our 911 phone calls. And what you can expect in my administration is real accountability and real results. strong management team, a use of data to make decisions, transparency in every decision we make, engagement of community in those decisions, and real visibility of your mayor throughout your city and part of your city.
Mr. Johnston?
I think one of the biggest changes I would want to see is a real aggressive effort around affordability. I think when I talk to a lot of folks in Denver, they are frustrated that they've seen a whole lot of units get built in this city over the last 12 years, but a whole lot of units that don't seem affordable to the folks that actually live here and are trying to be able to stay here. So you've seen a lot of luxury units go up that are $2,000 or $3,000 a month. What we want to really shift the focus toward is how do we make sure the development that's happening in this city is making it possible for people who live in this city and serve this city and have been here for generations to be able to stay in this city. For me, that means focusing on building units that are permanently affordable, so you don't have to pay more than 30% of what you make. So if you're a first-year teacher making $40,000 a year, you don't have to pay more than $1,000 a month in your rent, and you don't have to worry that next month or the month after some new landlord might come in and jack your rent up and you're going to be pushed out again. I think that's been a big challenge for folks, is feeling like the city's not been responsive to meeting the overwhelming crisis on affordability, and that's one I'd take on day one.
Ms. Brough, as the longtime head of the Denver Metro Chamber of Commerce, you led what is essentially one of the most powerful conservative organizations in Colorado. In our first debate, you told us that you couldn't immediately think of any examples where the interests of business are different than the interests of citizens. So here are a few examples of where Denverites voted and disagreed with you. Oil and gas setbacks. You fought against them. Denverites overwhelmingly voted for them. Paid family leave. You opposed it. Denverites voted for it by a wide margin. The creation of a progressive income tax to fund schools. You fought it. Denverites overwhelmingly voted for the measure. The question, has your advocacy on behalf of business interests been out of step with the views of most people in Denver?
Not at all. Let's just take one of those issues, paid leave. This has been, my mom was a single mom. I've been a single mom. Paid leave for families is one of my highest priorities and one of the areas I focused on my entire life. I provided it to employees at the chamber. But this is also where, when you have a flawed policy, I think our citizens of Denver want a mayor who tells them the truth, that a policy doesn't work, that it's flawed. And even Governor Polis agreed that that was a flawed policy. The city of Denver today, and many Denvers and the city of Denver and many other cities agree that it's a flawed policy and have adopted their own to provide a better benefit to employees. So I think on all of these, you have to dig in. But I understand there's times when the chamber's position would be different than Denver's, but the chamber's not running for mayor. I am.
How do we distinguish between the two?
I can answer every question about what my position is versus positions the chamber has taken. And I've done it throughout this campaign, and I'm happy to continue.
So fighting oil and gas setbacks, that was the chamber's position. Was that your position?
Yeah, my position on oil and gas has been very consistent, trying to set the highest standards and make our transition and hit our goals for 100% carbon reduction by 2040. Consistent.
So again, were you personally opposed to the measure that Denverites overwhelmingly voted for on oil and gas setbacks?
So let's focus on this particular measure. Denver has no production of oil and gas in its, so I don't care. We don't care about this setback issue in Denver.
I imagine people might
relevant.
care about the health and safety of people outside the city.
Yeah, of course.
So how about the issue of the progressive income tax to fund schools? Again, we're trying to distinguish between your personal position and the chamber's position. The chamber opposed the progressive income tax to fund schools. How did you personally feel about it?
Yeah, I don't oppose a progressive income tax, and I don't oppose funding schools. I support funding our schools, and I would support a progressive income tax. Again, for me, it'll be the details of the proposal that I would respond to.
And I asked you about some specifics. More generally speaking, to wrap this up, how often were you advocating for conservative policies through the Chamber of Commerce that you personally, privately disagreed with?
I think because, Kyle, the role I had was to represent an organization of 3,000 members and trying to reach consensus about really complex policy issues and the position they would take. Honestly, I separated, my personal view, even when I was trying to help drive toward that consensus or the approach we would take. And that was true whether we were taking more conservative, in your language, or more progressive positions, like supporting the LGBTQ community, or passing a tax increase to fund every Denver public school graduate to go to college. I would say on all of those, I was always trying to find a path forward to address a real challenge.
Thank you.
Ms. Brough, you've had concerns about increasing the minimum wage and the burden that it would put on businesses, in particular small businesses. You opposed Amendment 20, a statewide minimum wage increase that Denver voters had approved by a margin of 2-1. So should Denver's minimum wage workers be nervous that their mayor was opposing making more money?
No, not at all. The concern on that, I think, had to do with it was in the Constitution. I'm doing this from memory. And I think that is a problem that we have learned the hard way in Colorado, putting everything in our Constitution. And again, flawed policy is the challenge. I strongly support minimum wage. In addition, though, I strongly support work that we can do as a city to make it, people actually be able to afford to live here by focusing on housing and affordability of housing, which I think we can even make greater progress than just minimum wage.
So to be clear, you would not try to change the minimum wage in Denver or go back to city council or make any changes to the policies?
I support minimum wage.
Ms. Brough, former Democratic Senate President John Morse, a supporter of your opponent here, wrote an op-ed in March saying that while you were at the Denver Metro Chamber of Commerce, the chamber never lobbied one way or the other on gun control legislation. The same gun control legislation that Mr. Johnston references when saying he took on the NRA and won. Now, as you run for mayor, your campaign includes a plan specifically for gun violence in schools. Why is this topic important to you now, but you didn't use the weight of the Chamber of Commerce to lead on it then?
Yeah, this topic has always been important to me my entire life. My girls lost their father because of access to a gun. And so for me, this is a critical issue. But again, the Chamber of Commerce has a process and 55 board members to decide its priorities and what it focuses on. And you don't control that. That is an entire process. Didn't change what my priorities have been my whole life.
Going back to Kyle's question, was this an example of the Chamber of Commerce having one position and you personally having a different position?
Well, in this case, I think the Chamber had no position. But yes, I had a strong personal position. I have my whole life.
From a position of leadership, did you have any power to say, I personally think we should take a position on this?
Yeah, of course. And I did. And I probably have shared that personal position throughout the chamber in conversation. But I don't have the power to direct the positions of the chamber, even when I was its CEO.
Thank you. Mr. Johnston, regarding your resume claims on leading on universal preschool. You were CEO of Gary Community Ventures, which provided more than $1 million in funding to help pass Proposition EE in 2020. That raised nicotine taxes to fund universal preschool. Prop EE was put on the ballot by state lawmakers and a bill signed by the governor. I want to give you some excerpts from Governor Jared Polis' State of the State speeches. In 2019, quote, our top priority this session, offer free full-day kindergarten while expanding free preschool. In 2020, quote, I'm committed to achieving universal access to quality preschool for 4-year-olds by the end of my first term. So when you say you led on universal preschool, aren't you taking credit for the governor's push for universal preschool?
No, there was a broad coalition of people who were all working together to get universal preschool done, and we were proud to be a part of it. We started the drafting of the measure earlier that year and were prepared to go straight to the ballot on it, actually, and not go through the legislature. Through extensive negotiations with leaders in the legislature, we decided there was a path to go through the legislature. So we reached a compromise, brought it into the legislature, helped support and advocate for it to pass, and work with members inside the legislature. Then when it got referred to the ballot, we helped pull together the campaign to succeed at the ballot. That meant giving money ourselves. It meant fundraising for other organizations. It meant going to editorial boards and talking to media outlets across the state to make that case. And we're proud to partner with the governor and with organizations like Healthier Colorado and preschool advocates to make sure we got that done. So I think that was a broad coalition we were excited to be a part of from the very beginning.
So broad coalition, partner with, is that the same as leading?
Oh, yeah. I think that everyone in that coalition had a real leadership role. We had a leadership role in drafting and developing it with Healthier Colorado and Jake Williams and folks like the Mirage Foundation and others. We had a role partnering with legislators who helped lead to get the votes in the legislature to get it passed. We had a role in the ballot campaign, which required raising the dollars and building the coalitions to get it endorsed and passed. And it was a historic success, which brought universal preschool statewide. And I think that's a win-win for everybody that was involved.
When it comes to the gun control bills in 2013, you say you took on the NRA and won. One of the bills that you referenced was supposed to ban large capacity gun magazines that hold more than 15 bullets. You voted yes on that bill, and we can debate whether that's taking on the NRA or not, but my question is about whether you really won. My investigation a few years back proved both that large capacity gun magazines are still sold in gun stores throughout the state and county sheriffs are not enforcing the law. So why even reference this large capacity magazine ban as taking on the NRA and winning when it's been proven that large capacity gun magazines are still sold in the state?
Yeah, it's critically important to both pass legislation and then enforce it. Obviously, there are still folks speeding in Denver tonight, and that does mean we should take away the speed limits in the city. It means you have to work hard to enforce them. I think on this story, it's an important one. The actual story of this measure for folks that weren't there is that, yes, we were in the state Senate. It was on a final vote. We had lost several Democrats, and it was down to one vote. And we were waiting to make closing arguments to see if we could pass these two bills. Many people had led to get to that stage. The legislators in the House, the legislators in the Senate, the parents of people who had lost their kids, the victims and survivors, all showed up to push for that. They all led in this effort. But yeah, when it came time to try to hold the final vote, my caucus called on me to make the closing argument in that well, and I was proud to do it to make sure we both closed that 18th vote and that I could help cast one of those votes myself. Every single one of the 18 senators who cast a vote that day led that day. Every single one of them often faced threats, faced intimidations. Many of them then were targeted for recall. And when that happened, I also showed up to knock doors for those senators, to protect them, to help raise resources to make sure we weren't a proof point for why you couldn't take on gun safety, but instead why you could build a coalition to do that, and I was proud to be a part of it.
Why call it winning? Voting for it and passing it, sure, but why say you've won in this battle?
Well, first of all, the battle is never over. There's always more steps to take, and good steps have been taken this year. But at that point, there had been no real legislature that I know of in the country that had taken on this question of how to really ban high-capacity magazines, and the gun lobby was very powerful, as evidenced by the fact there were hundreds of NRA members circling the Capitol, honking their horns all day long to make sure we couldn't have debate on the Senate floor. People who got death threats, people who were consistently harassed. And so our ability to say we refused to back down. A lot of legislators thought of those ideas and backed off. We didn't back off. We stayed in the fight, we showed we could make progress, and then that wasn't enough. We stayed back to continue and return to these issues on issues like red flag laws, or the issue that the legislators did this session focused on things like raising the age for minimum purchase or adding waiting periods. Those are all important steps. No one battle wins the war, but you have to continue to stay at those day in and day out, especially on an issue as complicated as guns.
I want to ask you one more thing about another claim you make referencing COVID Check Colorado,
yes,
which provided COVID testing in the state. You claim you took it from one person to 1,500 employees. Now, the city has about 13,000 employees, so it's important to know your experience running a large operation.
Yes.
On the COVID Check Colorado website, under employment verification, it says most COVID Check Colorado sites were staffed by third-party staffing agencies. Individuals at these sites were not employed by COVID Check Colorado LLC directly. So can you clear up some confusion for me? If they were not directly employed by COVID Check, why are you claiming you had 1,500 employees?
Sure. So here's the important role that we played in this, and this also was a broad partnership. It was summer of 2020. If you remember, at that point, schools were shut down. There were a lot of fears that schools wouldn't be able to reopen in the fall. And we talked to teachers, and what they said overwhelmingly was, we want to go back to school, but we need access to regular testing if we're going to do that. And so we started in that summer a plan to start testing teachers in schools and colleges. We brought on more than 100 partners. We provided more than 100,000 tests to help reopen schools that fall. And then when it was time to scale that, when the November, December came and the state wanted to offer this kind of testing statewide, they came to us. We built a partnership to expand that, and we started leading and operating those sites around the state. That meant we had our own employees that were growing. That meant there were places where we had staffing agencies who helped us. But in each one of those places, we were partnering with those staffing agencies. We were directly paying them, and we were directly supervising them. They were the ones on our site being able to make sure when you drove up and needed a test, they were there to give you a test, to make sure the technology got you the results back on time. So we supervised and oversaw all of those partners, and we paid all their salaries, even if they were working for other staffing agencies.
You mentioned in the migrant conversation that you could hire staffing agencies in that situation. As mayor, would you consider that as they are city employees?
Oh, I think they are people under our supervision if we're hiring them and paying them, but they might be separate from city employees. But in this case, you have to be creative about how to solve problems like this. We had to do things like go to catering agencies that had gone bankrupt and said, we know you have a bunch of employees who aren't currently working because they were doing catering and that shut down during COVID. Could we convince all those folks to come be COVID testers? And more than 1,000 people all left whatever they were doing or decided to redirect their entire career paths to say, I will come in and serve the state to provide this core public service. That's a thing to celebrate, and we were proud to partner with them.
Thank you.
Yes.
A lot of candidates have stood at those two podiums over the years with real disdain for each other, but this race is weird because you two seem to actually like and respect one another.
And listening to you talk, it seems like you actually think that the other one would be a good mayor. You just think you'd be a better mayor. And that might be because you agree on a lot of things, but you don't agree on everything. So the same question for both of you. Is there any policy advocated for by your opponent that you think goes beyond just a difference of opinion or approach and is something that you think would be actively harmful or dangerous for Denver? Ms. Brough.
Yeah, I appreciate your question, Kyle. And it sounds like I'm too nice. I don't think that could be so. I'm going to focus on, I think, the plan to address people who are unhoused in our city. And I think I'll highlight, what I think are missing steps for Mike's plan. So first, I think there's an urgency. And I think his plan lacks an understanding of that urgency. And for me, that urgency is based on the number of people dying unhoused in our region. I think last year, 173 people died. The year before, 269. And when I spend time at encampments or talking with people who are unhoused, I can think of specific conversations I had recently with a woman named Sharon. And I ask every single time, would you like to get to a safer location if I had a place to take you? And it's emotional. People are begging to get to a safer location. I think Mike's plan lacks a sense of urgency about getting people to safer locations and saving lives. I think it lacks a regional strategy. And I think this is a fundamental core to being successful and really starting to address this issue. I think tiny homes are just not a practical solution as the primary way to house. And I really listen to service providers when they say that approach is not going to work. Those would be three I'd highlight where I think we're missing the mark on Mike's plan.
I'd ask you to respond. She says your homelessness plan lacks urgency, lacks a regional collaborative approach, and that the tiny homes plan is not an answer.
Yeah, I don't agree. And it's not just that I don't agree, it's that there's evidence all across the city to show that it's not accurate. We actually know this strategy does work, and we know it works at scale. I'll say a couple of things. First is there is every bit the urgency we can put in place for tiny homes as for any other strategy. The difference between my approach and Kelly's on this is she would keep folks in tents and safe outdoor spaces. What we know from both weather risks and safety risks, so you can still get your tents broken into, you can still have freezing temperatures in those places. We can 3D print tiny homes in 5 days. It's not a waiting period for that. What we know we need to do is be able to get access to sites where we can put homes that give people the stability and safety and dignity we know that they need. And that's what is being done right now in Denver. You can go see one. You can see the Colorado Village Collaborative site up at 40th and Monroe anytime. It has all those services, and people are there and they're housed and they're being successful. I do support the idea of partnering with the region, but I also don't want to wait for a 7-county blue ribbon commission to spend a year and a half thinking about what we should do on homelessness. We know this problem is urgent and it exists right in the core of our city, and we can be able to move those people immediately from the places where they're living on sidewalks and under bridges to places where they could have safety and stability and get back up on their feet. I would do that right away and first. When we get all those 1,400 people rehoused and we want to look with Aurora on what's happening on the Colfax border with Aurora, great. Or on the Lakewood border, we'll do that. But we don't need to wait for another city to lead our obligation to bring a solution now.
We're about to have a much longer conversation about how to address homelessness in this city. But Mr. Johnston, I wanted to provide an opportunity for you to answer the same question. Is there a policy of Ms. Brough's that you think goes beyond just a difference of opinion or approach that you think would be dangerous or actively harmful for the city?
Yeah, I think there are two strategies that I deeply disagree with. I think the first is on homelessness, and I think this is where Kelly has supported the idea of arresting people who are homeless. And I think what we know is this is not only a strategy that I think is not the morally right solution, I think we know it actually doesn't solve the problem. We know that no one in Denver needs to be homeless. We need to make sure we have a moral obligation to get them access to services. And we know we can do that by getting them into housing, getting them access to services, and not by the act of criminalizing homelessness, which I think is what has been tried in the past and has not worked. And so I think that's number one. The second is when in our last debate, Kelly mentioned her support for potentially rolling back the police accountability that was done with bipartisan support in the legislature several years ago, which says that if a police officer grossly abuses someone's constitutional rights in the way we saw after George Floyd's murder, that they could be civilly liable. I think we ought to keep very high standards for our officers. I think our officers are able to meet that standard. But I think going back on what has been a bipartisan support and deeply advocated by folks like Leslie Herod and others to make sure communities of color feel safely treated by their officers, I think that would really damage people's faith in our own officer corps.
Reference to current State Representative Leslie Herod, former candidate in this race, who's endorsed Mr. Johnston. Ms. Brough, this idea that you want to roll back police accountability, we've talked about this before. Could you please answer his criticism?
Yeah, not at all. I've never suggested, I will answer, but I've never suggested that we roll back accountability for our officers. This particular issue is talking about a state law that was changed. And even as I talk with officers about it, everyone agrees. We want high accountability for any violation of constitutional rights, any violation of the law, including personal liability. What we want to be careful about is when the city is the problem and that the officer isn't personally liable. And there's specific cases, and this is the distinction between, I think, legislation and being an executive. Understanding that sometimes the city may direct an officer. High-speed chases, I'll give a concrete example in our history. The city had a policy to have high-speed chases. They often resulted in accidents and settlements with third parties. Well, I would argue in that instance, the officer should not be personally liable. That's the only example I was trying to convey when we were discussing, but never not holding our officers accountable. Can I also talk about the homeless?
Briefly, please.
Okay. This issue of using the law to save someone's life, I want to be really clear. This is a last resort. And it's certainly not something any of us want to do. But we also know leaving people to fend for themselves today is resulting in the kind of deaths, hundreds of deaths every single year. I'm not okay with that. And for me, I'll measure success as your mayor as saving people's lives. And if I have to use the law to have someone go to Denver Cares because of intoxication or being high, not able to care for themselves, I will.
We were going to talk about this later as we discussed homelessness, but since you brought up this idea, and you clearly have a disagreement over the idea of should anybody be arrested for violating Denver's urban camping ban, a question for you, Ms. Brough. Your campaign has gone back and forth and back again on this issue of whether you'd have people on the street arrested if they refused the city's offer of shelter. February 17th, you said yes, you would. 3 days later, your campaign co-chair, Denise Maez, formerly of the ACLU, said you would not. The very next day, you said yes, you would. More recently in April, your campaign co-chair again said you would not, and she said you've been consistent on this. There's nothing consistent about this at all. Could you clear up for us tonight, would you have folks arrested for solely violating the urban camping ban? And can you explain why your campaign has been all over the place on this?
Yeah, first I want to say I'm really proud and grateful to have such a diverse coalition of people helping guide policy and develop it. And so I was unaware of the inconsistencies you've highlighted, but I do feel the campaign has been extremely consistent, or let me say, I have been extremely consistent. It is a last resort. None of us, I do not want to criminalize anyone who's struggling with homelessness. But I also recognize there may be instances where to save someone's life, we may have to use the law. And I have consistently said I would do that.
Thank you.
We don't have any candidates of color in the runoff. We also know it's our minority communities that are bearing the brunt of the effects of climate change in Denver, health disparities in Denver. As mayor, how do you plan to represent these communities but also build a trust with them? Mr. Johnston.
I think this is a really important question, and I'm proud of the fact that I've had the chance to represent them already and to do this work shoulder to shoulder. As you know, I was first elected to the state senate, and I represented what was a historically black district in Northeast Denver. So when I was elected, I knew the most important thing to do was to make sure I was deeply connected to that community and available and accessible for them to be able to reach me. So I opened a community office in North Park Hill in the Holly. I was there for 10 years. At that point, I was the only legislator who had a community office, but I thought it was important because I knew that I wanted to be in close community with the people who wanted to have their voices heard and made sure we could bring legislation to the Capitol that served them. The same thing was true when I was a school principal and represented a community of people that were many of them immigrants from Mexico and Guatemala who felt like they didn't have a voice in this country and wanted to know how they could pursue the American dream. And our effort to help make sure those young people could actually get access to college, and then going to the Senate to change the law to make sure those dreamers could pursue their dreams and get to college and get a job, has been a huge part of my service. I think my entire life over the last 25 years since I got out of college has been serving communities that have been underrepresented and making sure we elevate their voices and make sure those voices get heard. That's what I've done my whole life, and that's what I would do as the mayor.
Thank you. Ms. Brough?
Yeah, I want to start by just sharing a little about how relevant this question is, starting with my personal life. I married my high school sweetheart in Montana. Mike was indigenous, and we came to Denver because Montana was a tough place for a mixed-race couple in the 1980s, and Denver embraced us. Our girls are mixed race as well. And for me, what that meant is I understood at a very young age the privilege I have as a white woman. And I think that changed my view in every single job I have ever held and how I do the work I do. So for me, not only did I have to teach a daughter how not to internalize some of the race issues she would face, but I also then devoted myself at work to make sure my teams were diverse, my boards are diverse, my relationships, the work I do engages community, never assuming I know the answer, but engaging people to help identify how best to address the challenges and issues. I've not only done that in my work throughout my life, but in my campaign, and you'll see me do that as mayor.
Ms. Brough, Denver has never elected a woman mayor.
What?
It is a part of your campaign. It's in your new ad that is airing right now about how a woman is the right for this position. But today, the third place finisher in the first round, Lisa Calderon, endorsed your opponent and said that the woman card wasn't enough because you don't share her values. And do you think that women will vote for another woman even if they don't share in your values?
So let's start by first saying, I don't think I'm playing the woman card in that ad. What I say is the best man for the job happens to be a woman. The card I'm playing is I think I'm the most qualified candidate. That said, I do think values are important in guiding people in what decision they make about who they elect, their belief about who can do the job. I look at two of the people who've endorsed Mike, Lisa Calderon most recently, but Leslie Herod. They're probably the two most outspoken people in our state for defunding the police. And it is true. I have acknowledged publicly that I think we need officers and we need to hold them accountable. And so I could see why she would say she doesn't agree with that.
Let's talk about homelessness policy that you touched on a little bit earlier, and hoping that we can clear something up. Ms. Brough, you have repeatedly said that you will stop the Hancock administration's homeless sweeps policy. Yet you also told us in a debate that you would forcibly clear encampments that are in violation of the camping ban. Can you explain the difference between not sweeping encampments, but forcibly clearing them?
Yeah, sorry. I think what I'm trying to say is I'll move people to safer locations.
Against their will?
No, in this case, it would be using outreach workers and support. We know, and this is so clear from the experience of the service providers throughout our region, but moving people when you can take your pets and your partner and your family, to keeping people who have formed community living on the street, we know they'll voluntarily get to safer locations and will have huge success. And what you will see me do is use outreach workers to get people to safer locations. This is the place where if you won't go and we have a safer site and I think your life is at risk, I will use the law to protect you. And I'll do everything I can to make sure I'm not adding to the burden you face in your life. From making sure we do like what we did with drug court in the 90s, where we defer sentence, we defer judgment. But the whole point is to try to save someone's life and get them the help they need.
A short follow-up. That law has been on the books in Denver, is rarely used, again, because it's considered a last resort, and also because the thought is that that would get the city sued into oblivion over constitutional issues. You've got legal folks telling you you're on solid ground to arrest people for that?
Again, to arrest people for
simply violating the urban camping ban and not following your order to take shelter or resources.
Again, this is going to be in those rare situations when I think their life is in danger, and yes, I think we can do it legally. And we're not going to do anything that isn't legal.
Thank you.
Mr. Johnston, you've also said you'll forcibly clear encampments. The Hancock administration is doing that now, so what evidence do you see that it's an effective strategy worth continuing?
I think the current strategy is not working, and this is why my approach is different. What we know is not working about the current camping ban is if you try to move people off of a block where they are sleeping and they have no place else to go for housing, all they can do is end up on the next block, which is why we've seen this movement of people without any actual outcome. This is why my focus has been on getting them access to housing, and housing that's going to provide safety and dignity and stability that you get from these micro communities where we can put tiny homes. That is the priority, and what's important about this is it also addresses the myth, I think, that is out there, which is that folks don't want to take this kind of housing, what we know is many people may not want to go to a shelter because shelters can be dangerous, you can be unprotected, your stuff can get stolen. If we're offering units that actually offer heat and air conditioning, access to kitchens and bathrooms and showers, and safe locked door where you can store your stuff, we know overwhelmingly people who are unhoused will move to those sites. The reason why I've said I wouldn't rule out the use of it is there are occasional times where you have real health and safety risks. You have open propane tanks, or you have potentially contaminated needles, and you need to be able to make those decisions. There's a much different way to do that, which is by partnering with people, having conversations, and more importantly, finding safe places for them to go to, which is where you can allow them to move.
Just a quick follow-up. In the short term, before the first tiny home is built, where are they going?
So obviously, I think what will start on day one, if I'm elected, is the conversation with communities about where we can open these micro-community sites. Those include sites for tiny homes. Those can include converted hotels. Those can include outdoor spaces that are short-term. And as soon as we can site those, we can start moving people aggressively to those. And that's where we'll focus all of our energy. If we focus the energy on standing up that scale of housing across the city, which I think is what has not been done, then you have a capacity to actually not have to force people to move, to allow people to move to the kind of shelter that they want if we can offer it to them.
A quick follow-up on that, on your tiny home plan that you've talked so much about. You're talking about 10 to 20 sites around the city. I assume you're not guessing. I assume that your team has scouted them. You know that they're there. Do voters deserve to know where these tiny home villages will be located before they vote in this race? And then also, current zoning only allows them to be there for 4 years, and then they have to move for at least another 4 years. Mm-hmm. Would you look to change that with the help of City Council, or are you anticipating these 10 to 20 sites moving around every 4 years?
So first thing is, we do know that there are sites available. We have not selected the sites because I believe that the residents of the city ought to be able to be a part of that conversation. And so that's what we would enter into, is to say, here are the sites we have available. What do you as a neighborhood community believe is the right one of these sites to choose? And that conversation is what we would do up front. I think 4 years is still a long time horizon. It's better than what they had previously, where they had to move every year or potentially every 6 months. And so that provides for the stability to allow people to get into that housing. And usually they only need to be there 6 to 9 months to get back up on their feet, get treatment, get job training, get a job, make the first couple of paychecks, and now be able to find the housing you can move into. So I think that 4 years that the City Council has provided is going to provide us a lot of stability. If we needed to, we could make it more permanent, but I think that 4 years is a good window.
Thank you.
Mr. Johnston, you're pledging to do in 4 years what no major American city has ever done in any time frame to end homelessness. I just want to know which homeless advocates and experts are telling you that your 4-year plan will accomplish that.
Yeah, this is where I think the deeper you look at the problem, the more clear the path becomes. We're talking about 1,400 people right now that are what we would call chronically unsheltered. They are sleeping outside on the streets somewhere around the city. That is our target, is how can we get those 1,400 people who are currently unhoused access to housing that gets them off of a street corner or off from under a bridge. And what we know is that is what these micro-communities can deliver. We know it's eminently possible to build and deliver 1,400 tiny homes in a matter of months, not years. But we've allocated for, you got to find the sites. You have to place those micro-communities. You have to be able to then get people ready to transition, provide the services, hire the staff. So that is the process that is required. But what we know we can do, and the evidence shows it, is if you offer people that are unhoused housing like that, they will choose it and they will succeed there. There's a randomized controlled trial study done on the work that the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless did that shows that when you move people to these sites, 86% of them stayed housed a year later. The most successful city in the country was Houston. They were at 40%. That means we have data that shows right now we have a strategy that can more than double the best results in the country. And there's a real path for us to get all of those folks housed.
Ms. Brough, if he succeeds, he'll do what your former boss, John Hickenlooper, could not do in his pledge to end homelessness. If he doesn't succeed, should he be seen as, well, we tried, and just shrug it off as an aspirational goal like Hickenlooper did? Or would you say you're a failure?
Yeah, I think we have learned so much about homelessness in the last probably 15, 20 years. I think the one thing we know is what we're building is a safety net to catch people. Families like mine who, when things go wrong, are at great risk. And so I would say, I think what you're asking is, do I feel like I'm a failure as part of an administration who set out to solve homelessness and failed? I would say, yeah. Or we learned, and we should build off that learning and change our strategies accordingly, which is what I've tried to do.
So, and if he tries, if he's mayor and he tries and doesn't gets to the same conclusion you did, is it an aspirational goal or a failure?
I'm going to let you call him out, Marshall, and decide what you might say it is. I think you should learn from our past.
Just a brief, short answer. Is it an aspirational goal if you don't succeed, or is it a failure?
It's an aspirational goal, and if I don't succeed, it's also a failure. I think you set big aspirational goals because you believe you can accomplish them, and then you do everything you can every single day to deliver on them. So I believe in setting big, ambitious goals and then building broad coalitions to deliver on them. I've had the chance to do that a lot over my career, and that's why we set this big one, is I think the city actually wants to be called into a shared effort to say, let's take on something people think we can't do.
Thank you.
So in addition to local dollars and voter-approved funding measures, a lot of the programs addressing homelessness are also propped up by federal relief dollars. Mike Johnston, your plan includes securing $138 million in one-time federal stimulus funding, $50 million in federal funds to construct a regional navigation campus with wraparound services. But there's also a really big concern about a financial cliff of when those federal dollars dry up. When that day comes, where do you turn for that funding?
Yeah, thank you. And small correction, there is $138 million of statewide dollars. We're only assuming that Denver pulls down about $40 million of those, which is the one-time funds we need to build the actual tiny homes, the actual shelters people need to live in. That's perfect to do with federal dollars because it's a one-time fund with one-time resources. Then what we need are the ongoing resources to support the actual staffing of these sites, because that's equally important, is to make sure they have the wraparound services people need. So you have mental health support, addiction treatment, workforce training. Those dollars would come from the Proposition 123 dollars, which are state dollars that are recurring year in and year out. Obviously, we still have a great deal of city dollars, about 150 million or so that are used that include homeless targets. And so that base is there. But I think the one-time funds come to build the units, and then these state dollars come in an ongoing way to support the staffing of those sites.
Kelly Brough, your plan involves promising to eliminate unsanctioned encampments within your first year in office by maximizing current shelter and housing and then temporarily moving people into sanctioned camping sites until more housing and shelter is available. How is that realistic when Denver's current safe outdoor spaces run through the Colorado Village Collaborative said that demand for safe outdoor spaces is hugely outpaced by availability?
Yeah. I mean, this is where we have to sanction significant more sites in the short term to be able to get people to safer locations. It's also why I think we have to do it as a region so that we can have enough locations and get people to them. We know Denver today, because we have the majority of services and support for people, we attract a vast majority of people who are unhoused in our region. And so for me, this is partnering with those 6 mayors. My hope is I could get more upon election to focus on their cities and what they can do to help support this transition to temporary locations, while we then focus on building what we need in the longer term. I've had the chance to even talk with the state about 3 locations. That $138 million is significantly much more of it is available when we start to partner as a region. And there are 3 locations that are being looked at to get today: Ridgegate, which is in Arapahoe County, Hudson, Colorado, and Fort Logan, all of which I think could start to serve our region and receive some of that state funding to help us have more permanent sites that frankly provide really humane and dignified housing.
I want to take a moment for each of you to ask the other a question. Ms. Brough, your question for Mr. Johnston.
I think for me, I'm going to ask, it just came up in the last day, but when Lisa Calderon endorsed you, she said part of that endorsement was that you committed to have hands-off Denver public schools. And in the time that I've been in this race, I think one thing I really share with Denver residents is a loss in confidence in our Denver public schools. And so I wanted to know what your plan is to try to address the challenges we're facing in DPS with a hands-off commitment.
Sure. I think my plan on Denver Public Schools has been pretty straightforward. I think there are places where we know we can partner better with the district. I would do things like putting back in place the city school coordinating committee, so the school board and the city council, the mayor and the superintendent actually talk to each other. I would help expand our partnership in places like after school and summer school programming, where we know kids need access to services, particularly those kids who are on free and reduced lunch who can't get access to a summer camp or to after school tutors. I think that's a partnership we can expand. And I think the other one is we know there's a huge need in expanding mental health services. We know right now kids have not just survived the COVID pandemic, but also they've survived a year of significant school violence. We know we need more mental health services. And then I've said when there are places where I disagree with the school board, I would publicly call them out and say where I think they needed to do better and focus on instruction and high quality teaching and learning. And that means for me, supporting and pushing for candidates who I think will do a great job leading the school board. And it would mean for me opposing candidates that I think have not done a great job on the school board. So for me, that is what an actively engaged mayor needs to do and what I would do.
Mr. Johnston, your question?
Yeah, I think some of the questions I've found is as I've talked to progressive voters who are supporting us, they've talked about the differences between our records, and some of those came up tonight, like paid family leave or minimum wage. One that we haven't talked about tonight that I didn't understand was there was a piece of legislation on pregnancy protections around folks in the workforce that wanted accommodations. So that meant a pregnant or postpartum woman maybe wouldn't have to lift heavy objects or would be able to take a break and rest. I was proud to vote for that bill, but you in the chamber opposed it, which to me seems like a common sense effort to support people who want to stay in the workforce and bear children. I'm curious if you still oppose that measure or if you would have changed your mind since then.
I would never have opposed that measure. I would strongly support it. I'm a working mom who had 2 kids while I was working full-time. Not only did I require such accommodation, but I provided it to my own employees.
Well, the chamber opposed it under your leadership.
The chamber isn't running for mayor.
But
I am.
You did say a quote that you thought that it would grossly expand protections for workers, which was your and the chamber's case on that, and I wouldn't know why you would make that case.
I don't know. I don't know the issue or. But what you described to me, I'd strongly support, and I have my entire life.
Let's talk about Denver Public Schools, which you brought up there. Could you each take a minute to explain in specific detail how you make Denver a safer place to be a child, inside school and outside school? Ms. Brough.
I'll start with inside school. I think for me, I've spent most of my campaign in the living rooms of people throughout this city. I think I've been in 70 living rooms. I kind of wish I would have taken a picture of each of them so you could see the living rooms. We can make a coffee table book that you could have. But in those conversations, the number one issue often was discussion of our school board and loss of confidence in the school board itself and its ability to make decisions both about educating our kids but also keeping them safe. And one of the issues we discussed was this requirement for blanket policy, where schools themselves couldn't come together, the teachers, the principal, the students, and decide how best to keep kids safe school by school, because I do think it can look different. And I would strongly support a school board that recognizes that kind of autonomy and agency in our schools increases safety for our kids, including those schools who want school resource officers, which is part of, I think, the last debate you all hosted.
Ms. Brough, thank you. That's how I want to make sure we hear from Mr. Johnston on that as well. How do you make Denver safer for kids inside and outside school?
I think the best way to keep a 17-year-old from picking up a gun is to make sure when that kid is 12, he picks up a passion. He picks up something that he actually loves, that is a part of a positive peer group that gets them motivated and engaged. That's why I would really start with expanding these after-school and summer school programs for kids on free and reduced lunch so they can help find those passions early on. The second best way you avoid a 17-year-old from shooting someone else or injuring himself is when that young person is 13 or 14 or 15 and makes their first mistake, gets caught with a gun for the first time or a serious criminal activity, we actually dramatically increase the intervention we provide to wrap around that young person. That means counseling, that means supervision, that means positive peer groups, that means family-based supports. I would significantly expand that kind of support across the city. And then the third is you do have to support schools in providing the security they think they are going to want to keep their kids safe. That can look different school to school, but when parents and teachers tell us we want back some basic security in our school, including school resource officers, that means for me allowing those parents and those teachers and those school leaders to choose that and keep that.
Some short answer questions on the situation in DPS to get some clarity. Both of you support the idea of individual schools deciding whether or not they want a school resource officer. If it means that the city has to pay for it, are you willing to do that, Mr. Johnston?
Yes, I am.
Ms. Brough. Ms. Brough, you seem to suggest that the DPS discipline matrix should be changed. As we've reported, young people charged with violent crimes up to and including attempted murder are allowed back into class so long as the attempted murder happened off of school property. Would you actively seek, through school board races or whatever, to have DPS reform its discipline matrix?
What I would do is partner with DPS and our community to be able to, yes, I would. Listen, when we think about our obligation to educate our kids and keep them safe, I think we can do both of those things and have kids who are at high risk, both for their own protection, but also other kids, to be in a safer location or in another school or learning in a different manner until they're stabilized or doing better or deemed to not be at risk to other kids.
Mr. Johnston, does the mayor have any role in leaning on DPS over their discipline matrix?
Yeah, I think the mayor should be a part of this conversation, and here's why. I think we've missed what can be a very reasonable solution here. I ran schools that served kids who had committed murder or had attempted murder, had serious histories of sex assault, and we had settings where those kids would succeed. They were often 40 kids, and it's 11 or 12 adults, and that includes therapists and psychiatrists and psychologists. They are created for that service. We can both offer every kid a free and appropriate public education and not say that a kid who's been expelled from another school for a gun charge ought to be in a 3,000 student comprehensive high school where we have teachers every day trying to pat them down for a gun to make sure that they're safe. That is not the right strategy, but there is a way to serve those young people and to serve them in a setting that's going to serve them better and that's going to serve the rest of their peers better.
Both of you said you'll get involved in school board races. That's an awful nebulous thing to say. Let's be specific. The DPS board member who led the charge to get school resource officers out, Vice President Aonte Anderson, is up for re-election in November. Should Aonte Anderson be re-elected to the Denver School Board? Ms. Brough.
I'll work with the community to identify 3 people that, there's 3 seats up, and I'll work in community in Denver to identify the 3 people that need to be on the school board instead of who's there today.
It's declined to answer. Should Aonte Anderson be re-elected?
Instead of who's there today.
I want to make sure we're clear on that. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for catching that. So you will oppose his re-election?
I will support someone else with the community that restores confidence.
Mr. Johnston?
I believe he's lost the faith of the voters on this one, so I do not know that he will run for that seat, but I believe he's lost the faith of the voters based on the leadership over the last several years.
Thank you both. It's time for closing statements as determined by a coin toss. Mr. Johnston, you'll go first.
Thank you. I appreciate you all having us. Thanks for spending the time. We were just talking about schools. When I first became a school principal, one of my mentors had a quote she used to say, which is, there's only two things you can share with young people, truth and hope. Because if you don't tell people the truth, they don't have any way of knowing how to search for a world that could be better. If they don't have some sense of hope, they're not inspired to go look for that world at all. I think Denver has some hard truths we have to face. Those truths include the fact that tonight, more than 80% of the teachers and nurses and firefighters who serve this city can't afford to live in the city. That includes tonight, it's true that one of our flagship high schools had not just 1 or 2, but 3 shootings in the same year. It includes the truth that tonight there are more than 1,400 people around the city and county of Denver who can't find a place to sleep because they're sleeping on the streets. But for me, the hope is much bigger than that. The hope is we actually know these problems are solvable. I've spent my life building coalitions to take on big, progressive ideas to deliver historic results on hard problems. I know Denver can solve these problems, and I'm excited to work with you shoulder to shoulder to deliver a city that we're going to be proud of, we'll be proud to pass on to our kids and our grandkids, and that's the Denver I want to help build with your support.
Thank you. Ms. Brough.
Thank you. Every beautiful thing I have in my life is because I chose Denver as my home. And my path has not always been easy. I lost my father to violent crime. My family received government assistance when I was a kid. And we know the pain of losing someone you love to addiction and suicide. But those experiences also showed me the strength of the human spirit. And I see that resiliency everywhere I go in Denver today. And while I've never run for office before, I have run the city of Denver when John Hickenlooper was mayor. And that experience has taught me that together we can achieve the vision we share for our city, a safer, cleaner, more affordable Denver, where we end the unsanctioned camping, where those who are most vulnerable get the support and services and housing they desperately need, where our kids get the education they deserve, and we do it so they're safe. But also that every single person who works in our city can choose to make Denver their home. And I know this, together we can make that vision a reality. I love you, Denver. I'm asking for your vote so we can get to work.
Thank you both. Kelly Brough, Mike Johnston, thank you for your time tonight. In our previous debates, you and your teams have been responsive to every question we've had throughout the campaign. Hopefully that allows voters to make an informed choice. You're getting your ballot now. It's got to get back by June 6th. For Anusha Roy and Marshall Zelinger, all of us at 9 News, good night.